Some, they just did better. They were not educated. They came from backgrounds where they had no of how to live a better life and prison. Just lack of. Some people, they wanted, they knew they had made a mistake, they want to change, and then there are always that chunk of people who couldn't. They've done what they did and they would go out and do it. They are quite happy to come back, spend some time, go back out. So for them, it's like a guest house kind. So all these different were there. And the point is, to each of these different, I had to make a sort of assessment which category they belonged to, communicate with them accordingly. You can't go and communicate to a guy, a willful defaulter, equivalent, right? A person who is just going and coming back, sees it as a game, and talk to him about morals. It's not going to work. So, and the same way, the communication has to be tailored. The reason I bring this up here is there are similarities to the world of collection, saying that people are delinquent or the equivalent of criminal. There are some collection heads who may believe so. That's not the intent, this analogy. But there is a similarity in the motivations that and the reasons that cause a person, a customer to become delinquent are many. We could look at some people who, and you know these, that I'm just putting this out here for context, so it sort of ties in with what I'm going to. There are people just simply forget that they have a payment to make and they didn't top up their account, or they become delinquent. There are people who are in some temporary difficulty. When that is resolved, they want to make the payment, they're happy to do it. Then there are those, again, like some of the people in prison, lack of education. They do not even know that not paying is going to have an impact on the credit score. It's going to have a long-term impact on their ability to borrow, etc., etc. So the lack of education is a, and there are people who are helpless. They want to pay, but they don't know what to do, how to pay, how to make it happen. And then, of course, there are the equivalent of the people who treat the prison as a guest house. The willful default is a fraud kind of person, right? So there are always these experience people, particularly in the financial institutions, who are day in and day out, you sort of, perhaps the last category, like the journalists, like the newspapers, which carry sensational stuff. This occupies a lot, and therefore we end up perhaps thinking that most delinquent people fall into the last category, when statistics say otherwise, that the actual willful defaulters is not as high a percentage. I'm not saying I'm not here to make a moral argument that people are good at heart, and that's not the intent. But I'm saying that these classifications, and it is good to know these classifications and deal with customers accordingly, so that we are not spoiling relationships which could otherwise have been maintained even while we are collecting on delinquency. And that's the goal here for me. I want to talk how we can use digital collections as a medium, improve the collection journey, so that we have a chance of keeping the customer relationship intact, or perhaps even improve it, where the customer is a good, while we actually don't drop on the numbers. And how and why digital collections can play a role in achieving this objective, which hitherto has, even if it's there in the mind of the collection team at the bank or wherever, it's not it has not been a practical thing to implement under the context of just tele and field being the means of collections. But digital offers some opportunity. Why is this difficult to achieve in tele and field? Why is it difficult to go out and say, I want to keep the relationships going, and at the same time, I want to meet the numbers that I have to meet? Why is it difficult? The first, the people who are sitting at the back devising collection strategies, who could devise communication strategies, they are not the people who are actually talking to the customer. There is a gap. There is a one step. And in that hop, we are not only talking about different people, we're talking about people who have a different set. They have a different gap in communication, how effectively they can communicate, and a gap in motivation. What is their motivation to build a long-term relationship or to retain the relationship with the end customer when their entire incentive plan is based off how much have you collected this month and what numbers did you meet, etc. They have no motive. And a point that I have not mentioned in the slide, but which struck me as very pertinent, is a tele or a field interaction is essentially All discussions with the customer have to happen real time, which means the time factor is very limited. You have got to get to the point. You've got to say, hey, you owe me this, you get me out. Otherwise, what do? You can't have multiple interactions trying to bridge relationships. It's very difficult. Digital brings the element of ink into the. We are able to communicate in asynchronous fashion with the customer. We have the opportunity to do multiple contact points with the customer. All of these advantages digital brings to the table, which tele and field did. And the people who are devising that strategy that is defined can be communicated in toto to the end customer, because there is only the technology hop. And that technology hop can be as good as you program it to be. So your entire communication strategy with the customer it can be in toto transferred without any loss. There is no Chinese whisper here. And the tech can enable something. So therefore, I say that digital can provide a quantum improvement to the current approaches of what we hope to achieve with tele and field without compromising on. So I said, why is it different? There is no, to reiterate these points, there is no gap between the communication strategy and the communication execution. It's as good as the programs that we are able, and how well we are able to leverage AI and ML and all these things that have just come up. And therefore, I think it is time that we can start thinking in terms of customer collection. We do journeys everywhere. We do journeys on the lead generation side of things, journeys in CRM, etc. But we've not thought of collection as a journey, identifying where the customer is at this point in time, gradually increasing the strength of the man to lead to a point where we say, hey, there is no hope, now we have got to. That as a graded path rather than that as a one. And today we begin with transactions. The first call is how can we mix transaction and relationship into that particular communication? Of course, when I talk to customers and I ask them, what do you look for in digital collections? The first response I get is, perhaps it'll be cheaper than tele, it'll be cheaper. Of course it is cheaper, but me, digital collections being cheaper and a lower cost of collections is I would urge that don't think of it as the main reason. And then what happens is you take whatever templates you're using in tele and field, apply the same template onto digital and simply say, I don't have people, now it's cheaper. It's underuse of the potential and capability of digital. So take a step back. What is collection? We are essentially persuading someone to make good on a commitment that will, as much as possible, positively impacting the relationship. Definitely not negatively, and I'm not even saying neutral, I'm saying positively impacting. Because when some customer is in a spot and we are able to work with them through that, still make numbers, that customer is going to become a much more loyal customer to you than he would otherwise if we just dealt with them. So therefore I say, think of digital collection in terms of customer journey. And I say, make intelligence as a first-class citizen. What does that mean? Every interaction with the customer feeds into our data pipeline, which feeds into intelligence, not for the sake of data crunching and munging, but more about understanding better about this particular customer. Where is he from? And therefore using that into our models. How do we then identify such customers? How do we feed that into the model? So I'm seeing therefore collection as an exercise in pursuit. And Newton, I think Isaac Newton said this, that whatever I have achieved by standing on the shoulders of giants. And I think we have the opportunity here. When we look at collection as persuasion, we have a lot of giants in the field of persuasion. I take a small detour here. I don't know how many of you have read the works of some of these stalwarts. There is Daniel Kahn, there is Robert Cialdini, these guys and a few others. I'm off late, I'm reading a lot of Nassim Taleb. So these guys have done a lot of pioneering work on the subject of human behavior, why people think and act the way they do, and how understanding that we are able to turn that into advantage. Advantage not in the sense that it is to their disadvantage, but a win-win situation. So I would you spend time going through, if you have not already done so, going through the works of some of these people to understand how we could use these tools of persuasion as we go down the path of digital. So these points are acted as a facility to do non-real-time asynchronous customer journeys using. And if we are able to combine them with these techniques of persuasion, understanding the biases under which people operate, and we are able to make that, incorporate that into the customer journey, then we have something very interesting going through digital. And what is the role of tech, therefore? Tech is an enabler to make this happen. And if a tech will help further this goal, it is useful tech. And if not, it is overkill. So I'm not a fan of using ML for the sake of ML, AI for the sake of AI is a big thing, so let's put models everywhere. In fact, I have a slide on my thought process on how we need to use ML in the key thing here is the role. This will help me build relationships, it will help me collect, it will play well with tele where required, with field where required. Therefore, I will use tech to make it. That has been our approach to tech also at Sumeru Enterprise Tiger. How do tech is to further these. So these authors, they have spoken about biases. So you take, for example, framing bias as an example. One of the biases that Daniel Kahneman speaks about is called the framing bias. How we actually put the point for, the wordings we use triggers a certain type of. If, for example, if I go to the hotel where we are staying and I ask them, how far away, how long does it take to go to the Leela? Will it take about 2 minutes? The person may say, no, it may take about 25 minutes. But if I go to the same person and I ask him, do you think it will take me about 10 minutes? He may say, no, it may take about 50. The answer changes depending upon how I put the initial. So how do we leverage techniques like this in our meeting? Because at the end of the day, digital is a lot about messaging. We cannot ignore the messaging aspect of it and say, I have all the tech. Because the only point that the customer sees of our entire digital collection strategy are the messages that land up and the two-way interactions that they start having over, say, WhatsApp or something like that. And then how digital has interpreted with tele, so that when somebody picks up the phone, they know of the digital interactions that have already happened. Then there is power to this whole digital collection. Now, so therefore, where does AI and ML figure? To me, digital is not about just segmenting customers. Okay, I've got this slice and dice. I'm going to now send them reminders one after the other, and each reminder in some fancy word is still telling the person, here is a payment link, make this payment, go there and make payment. To me, that's not sufficient of AML. Gen AI can play a role. Definitely, because messaging is so important. We want to have generative AI help us in that particular. I think sentiment analysis has an important role to play. You sort of, over time, you're able to analyze the conversations of the various people that are having, and the more two-way start having digital, the more useful it to be. And those kind of conversations will help us understand the customer's situation better. Going back to the first few points I mentioned, what is the motivation? Why is the customer he is? Sentiment analysis could help to some extent in getting to the point. And other learning models can do. And I put a big. I want to point about 3 things when it comes to ML. This is more for the people on the financial side. The service providers probably know most of the stuff. But the 3 points I want to discuss here are bias, explainability, and hallucination. Bias is the data that, so when I go to customers and I talk about AI ML, the first question is, do you have, and I say yes, they say, oh, very good, show me your prediction. An astrologer also makes prediction. Everybody makes, there are so many people, I have my own opinions, I make my prediction. What am I basing those predictions on? An ML model also bases its predictions on how good is that data, how well trained is it. Now, it is difficult to get a hang of that, because when you ask a service provider how good is data, you'll get a good answer. It's all very good. We trained it on all these kind of models. We see. But then the next question is, how explainable are the now within ML, there are different ways of doing. If we do ML using some of the sophisticated models like neural networks, etc., or what you're used to in GPT, explainability is low. You can't explain the path to a particular. When you can't explain a path to that prediction, why you arrived at that prediction, it is tricky to follow. It is risky, particularly at the early stage in which digital collection is, AAML is, in the collection phase. It is risky to pick on models which are low on expertise. So I would urge you to look into this. Even as service providers, we need to look into not fancy out there, oh, network is great, deep learning is great, let's build. Is it giving good experience? I think critical question. Hallucination. I trained the model on personal, a million of them, and I apply that to findings on credit. The model is not going to tell me I don't know. The model is going to start giving very intelligent reports, predictions of how to deal with that credit. And we don't know better. We just then take it up. So I think it's important before jumping into this ML wagon. There are too many, it's a very complex field, but at least I would urge, look into these three aspects of yes, explainability, hallucination, some basic research before we jump into what ML works and what ML does. So in the early days that we are, I and Enterprise Tiger, we prefer models which are more Excel, therefore more towards decisions, rule-based models, rather than going down the path of neural networks and deep learning. And that's just the way we have approached. So my key takeaways to you for the think of digital collections as much more than just low-cost automated collections. Leverage the advantage by starting build customer. Let's understand the biases and persuasion techniques that can be used in digital to further leverage digital collections. Combine that with tele for the last mile to make sure the collection and the numbers actually happen. And let's look at this as a new to improve our understanding of the deep tech combined with deep understanding can take collections to a point where we are collecting and building positive relationships with us. And this is the point of view that has been in Tiger and Incredible, which is our digital product into in the digital collections. Do drop by at our stalls outside anytime you feel like.